Hello, and welcome to World Water Week. Today we're taking a deeper look at drought resilience and how cross border and collaborative approaches can spell brighter futures for communities and ecosystems. To dig deeper into this and to more, I'm joined by Dr. Daniel Segai, Program Officer and Lead of Drought and Water Scarcity at the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, or UNCCD. Kari Vigerstol, Director of Water Security Science and Innovation at the Nature Conservancy, where she's leading a team providing cutting-edge science and tools to support the scaling of nature-based solutions for resilient water and food systems. And Professor Kaveh Madani, Director of United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, also known as the UN think tank on water. He's also the former Vice President of the UN Environment Assembly Bureau and a former Deputy Head of Iran's Department of Environment. Thank you so much for being here. I think it's a very powerful panel that we have here today to discuss this. But Daniel, I want to start with you. I think for a lot of us, myself included, when we think about drought, I think we're primarily thinking about the impacts to farmers and food security. And, is it really just all about a lack of rainfall and the impacts on food, or is there more to the drought story?
Thank you very much, Kanika, for asking this question. Let me start by saying this. Drought is not a sector, it is a connector. And the cascading, the spiraling impacts of drought are now more felt because we have now more sectors interconnected to each other. So I think we need this systemic approach to drought. Talking about drought, we need to think about land. What do we do about land and water systems? And drought is not only affecting livelihoods on agriculture, it is also affecting, for example, energy. In Venezuela, where the hydropower station, as a result of low reservoir levels, had to cut the electricity. In Bolivia, there was, this energy crisis. It made this school to close early. And also the hygienic process or the hygienic measures for girls as a result of low water levels in Bolivia, they were forced to close schools early. So it is about tourism. Also because Namibia, for example, and Zimbabwe had to auction their wildlife. 1,000 animals were just forced for sale simply because of drought. This is elephants and other wildlife. This is also ecotourism. So I think there is, in a way that we cannot imagine, drought is affecting us all. And drought and health also, I think, lots of suicidal rates as a result of the depression, mental health effects, the increase on sun and dust storms, wildfires. This is also polluting the air, pollution that we breathe, irritating the bronchi, the lungs, or some respiratory infectious disease. Having said this, I also want to say that we are all in this together. And drought is affecting us all. There is no country that is immune to drought. So drought does not discriminate. But the impacts of drought do discriminate. Women and children are more disproportionately affected by drought. And the gender inequality inherent in many countries is also hampering the capacity, the coping capacity on drought for women. And also, I think this is very, very important to mention that people living in low and middle level income countries, 85% of the drought is affecting for people living in low and middle income countries. So I think it's very important to mention this. And we need a holistic approach, a whole of society approach. We are all in this together. That's why we are going now to the Conference of Parties in Saudi Arabia, where this issue of land drought resilience will be discussed. 197 parties of the UNCCD are coming to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia in December, where they will discuss about land restoration, how can we have a whole systemic approach, global policy instruments on drought. So this is very, very important, and I think the topic of the moment, and we see it everywhere that drought is happening. Also, the drought that has happened, for example, in Europe in summer, it was one of the worst in the last 500 years. Also affecting transportation, which is very important. The river Rhine was very low in level, and then this hampered also these shipping levels, and of course, it's also affected the fuel prices. So very important. topic, and we need to be together to discuss this at COP16. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I mean, I think, you know, you said it very well there. It affects us all. It affects all sectors. I'm pointing out particularly here, you've mentioned energy, transportation, education, and particularly of access of education with dignity for girls. Super, super important, but also those touched on ecotourism and the livelihood that support, but also how and we've seen so much of how ecotourism is also so important for those land restoration efforts, and ensuring that that we continue to preserve wildlife out there. Thank you so much for that. The situation sounds so complex with so many different actors. Kari, you are working on part of that solution base. And so I'm really curious to hear from you. What are some of those solutions that you've seen to build resilience in communities and ecosystems as well as economies? And what kind of role are changing weather patterns playing in all of this?
Yeah, great question. Just to, as you hear about all those impacts that Daniel described, I think a really important point up front is that investing now in the near term in building that resilience is critical rather than to avoid those kinds of costs when those events are underway. So just emphasizing the need for investment now in drought resilience to reduce those impacts that you heard about. And I wanted to highlight the role of 3 types of solutions in addition to what you might normally think about for drought resilience, such as building big gray infrastructure, water storage projects. And that's nature, technology, and governance. Nature has a really important role in building drought resilience in our systems when implemented at scale and in the right places. It can help make sure that our hydrologic systems are operating as they were intended to be, and that we can naturally store water, release it later when during drier times, and build that resilience for our ecosystems and for our communities. And earlier this year, we released a report called Accelerating Adaptation, which looked specifically at the role of nature in combating the increasing risks of drought and flooding that are expected to occur across the globe in the next couple of decades. And what we found was that in 1/3 of the places where these risks are expected to increase, nature has a really important role to play in addressing and reducing these risks. Under technology, which also has a really critical role in building drought resilience and in forecasting and building the capacity of communities to respond to these droughts, including improved weather forecasting using technologies such as AI and remote sensing, early warning systems, agronomic efficiencies, water reuse, and other kinds of technologies that can help put in the hands of communities and those that are working to manage our water resources to address these challenges. And finally, policies that incentivize resilience building and really clarify the roles for all stakeholders of water use, both in normal times and in drought times, are critical to making sure that management of water is in a way that helps address what we do in these times of drought, and really take into account ecosystems and those most vulnerable populations that you mentioned, Daniel. And it really, that governance can really determine the level of impact of those drought events and the impact on livelihood. And we need to take into account blue and green water, as well as conjunctive management of both groundwater and surface water, which becomes even more critical during drought times, as we've seen play out in many places where groundwater is drawn down, especially during drought. And we need to have a commitment to also integrating information from indigenous knowledge and more traditional solutions, and identify a lot of the win-win solutions. So solutions that can address both drought, but also some of these other challenges we're facing. For example, there are nature-based solutions that help store floodwater during high flow time that then can be made available during a drought period. And as with all of our solutions, we need to consider the trade-offs of the different solutions and how we can put solutions together to continue to build resilience of these systems.
Thank you so much, Karya. I mean, I'm taking away those three key points you mentioned: nature, technology, and governance. I think also under that technology point, I'm really excited to hear you reference AI. I think, as a sector, we need to fully embrace this revolution that's going to happen here, but also the importance of governance, not just in the moment of drought, but all of that preparatory work that needs to go. That if we have resilient systems before the drought hits, we're going to be better off in the end, and so we need to start working with that mindset. Thank you for that. Kaveh, I'd like to come to you. As the director of the UN University for Water, Environment, and Health, I can imagine you spend quite a bit of time thinking about the future water leaders and how we should shape them in order to address these big challenges. But you yourself are also a leader, and were the deputy vice president of Iran during a major drought. So I'm really curious to hear from you. What is it that we need to get right today in order to build the right environment for success and good leadership tomorrow?
No pressure. So the problem, droughts have been there forever, right? So they have killed civilizations and destroyed, communities in the past. Over time, we have managed to, through building infrastructure and systems, dampen the effects of droughts, and that has caused a problem because there are moments of drought that are not, that hydrologists are warning about the drought, but the effects are not felt by the policymakers, by the communities. There are sometimes the other way in some places that it's raining out there. People have the perception of water availability, but when you think about the overall consumption, the consumption is much more than the available water. So you are living in a drought even during a wet period. That understanding has not been transferred to the society and to the policymaker. We still live and function in a reactive mode. We keep talking about droughts, but droughts are still, our response to drought is still reactive. We are not there. We're not proactive. We're not planning for it. We don't appreciate the fact that droughts are there and we need to live with them. And even the definition of drought might have changed. We're now talking about a permanent deficit, sort of a water bankruptcy situation where is lasting for a long, long time. It's no longer a simple anomaly. There is another thing. Climate change is a major contributor to droughts, more frequent, more extreme droughts. But climate change is not the cause of droughts. Droughts existed before humans stepped on this planet. So, if you think about all of that, but when it comes to policymaker, when it comes to decision making, actually, climate change is a blessing there because you can always blame the lack of inaction on droughts and blame every failure on climate change that has been created by a global community, and so you can kind of justify the inaction, and I think that's another major issue. Another major problem, and I think that's on us to do things differently on the future leaders to promote the water sector, the land sector you just mentioned. Climate change, the fight against climate change is not only about the energy sector. We keep talking about energy transition. How about the opportunities in the water sector? We treat the water sector as the victim sector, right? Where there would be more impacts and we have to get prepared. There should be adaptation. But the water sector, the land sector, are the mitigation sectors. Actually, the most, maybe if you compare, in many cases, much more effective, cost effective, the little cost. And then it's the opportunities created for the large community of farmers, the poor, those with poor income subsistence. So they become part of this fight against climate change. And we need leaders of the global South who push for that and advocate for those opportunities that are out there and treating water as the mitigation sector and putting farmers actually in the center of the fight against climate change. So don't blame it on climate change. Be proactive. Admit the fact that this is permanent. We have to live with drought. We cannot mitigate droughts. We have to live with them, and then promote the water and land sectors as the opportunity sectors.
Great, wonderfully. I hear very much from you, and what Daniel was also calling for, that need for that strong collaboration. But I also, very much heard from you the idea that perception is important. And so I think I take from that the importance that we all have to play as those who are quite, aware or who are empowered within the water sector, that we have to bring that out to others and we have to make sure that everybody knows. Thank you so much for that. It's very, very clear, I think, from this conversation. I'm feeling the urgency. I'm sure our audience members are as well, that there's enough to do out there, but there's also enough evidence to support. And as Kaveh said, this isn't new. It's been there since before we were here. So I want to hear from you a little bit. What's standing in the way of that progress? If we know that these challenges exist and we know we have to do something, why isn't it happening? Why are we still having these conversations? So what's standing in the way of that progress? I think you've touched on it a little bit already there, Kaveh. And then what goes with it is, what's that big thing that needs to change in order to drive stronger drought resilience? So maybe, Daniel, I'll start with you.
Sure. I have a message of hope that the policy instruments that you were mentioning, global policy instruments, are now underway. Countries are now going to be discussing a lot of options on how to manage drought sustainably, especially under the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. They are looking into options like the drought resilience framework, like the biodiversity framework, for example, a systemic approach on how countries can also learn from each other, trying to really systematize on where we are going to have to go in terms of the goals, the target setting program, so that we know where we are going. This is one of the options that they are looking into. They are also looking into how to beef funding so that countries would also work on the implementation of the plans, because we have worked with countries. They have now more than 70 countries have a national drought plan based on principle of risk reduction. The major paradigm shift was drought is not a crisis, it is a risk. For a risk, you need a policy that reduces the risk. So countries have come to this level, and there is a major global drought conference that is coming up also in September in Geneva, where there will be a lot of discussion on how to go from transition from policy into action, the implementation approach. And there is a strong belief, at least from my side, that we can learn from each other. Countries learn from each other. That's why we are developing a community of learning and practice on drought. And you can Google it, Community of Learning and Practice on Drought Management, UNCCD. Now, countries, regional platform for Africa, for Asia, Latin America, they learn from each other. And this topic is about elevating drought resilience beyond sectors and boundaries and beyond borders. So I think it's very important that we allow countries to learn from each other. One last thing that I want to say is, the governments of Spain and Senegal have also initiated an international drought resilience alliance. It is spearheaded by these two countries, but more than 40 countries, 30 organizations and non-UN organizations have joined this at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it's really getting a lot of political traction. So governments are sensitized to promote really the issue of drought. So there is a message of hope, and really, we need to make sure that UNCCD COP16 makes a game change for this issue of drought resilience, and we are all in this again together.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I take that message of hope with me. Kari, we just have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you one of those minutes. Please tell us what's the way forward.
Fantastic. Related to the policies, I think, is the need to drastically increase investment in drought resilience and climate adaptation. As we've seen, climate adaptation investment is running far behind investment in climate mitigation, and we need to increase that investment by 3 to 7 times by 2030 to even begin to meet the needs of communities to adapt to the impacts that we're going to be seeing and we're already seeing. And it's going to take concerted efforts from governments, civil society organizations, the private sector, and innovative financing solutions in order to make this happen. So I think that's the point I wanted to drive, is just along with those policies, and I think those policies will support this, is that increase in investment in building the drought resilience, giving the devastated impacts that we can experience under drought.
They definitely go hand in hand, I'm sure. Kaveh, please.
I just compliment the discussion here. I think we need to keep remind ourselves that a complex problem like this, a systems problem like this, cannot be solved only through technology. I think there is still a tendency there that with more investment and more technologies, there's this thinking that we can address this problem, we can mitigate it, we can remove it. No, droughts are there. Droughts will be there forever, and a management problem must be solved through the combination and portfolio of policy actions, technology, investment, and so on. And I think that's something that we need to change, to remind everyone that this is not a technological solution, this is not an engineering problem, and that must be actually changed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I think it really rounds out the point well. We see many different elements here, many different ways that we need to move forward. And I think for our audiences, I think we all have a role to play here. I think we've heard quite a few options here from our panelists in terms of role that we can each take forward into this. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an incredibly enlightening conversation, and we really look forward to seeing how you carry these messages forward into the UNCCD COP in December, as you mentioned, in Saudi Arabia. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to you, our audience, who are joining us here in Stockholm, and to those of you online. Goodbye. Those awkward moments.